Let's get right into it.
Yeah, I feel like that's been happening to me over the past few years as well. And I think it's for the better. It's less entertaining and it's less fulfilling on a superficial level because it's nice to be able to, even when you're just talking to somebody, it's nice to be able to, at dinner, when somebody asks you what anything, right, here it is, I'll lay it out. Here's my beliefs and here's why I think this and let's have a discussion about it. It's less fulfilling to sort of go, you know what, man, I've got kind of no idea, but here are some thoughts. But I think it protects yourself against the kind of spiritual crisis which you inevitably run up against when that first domino starts to fall. And for you, it was evolution. You've said before that you used to kind of evangelize against evolution without having known very much about evolution. I mean, it sounds like the moment you started like reading into evolution of its own accord, you became convinced by it. How do you navigate arguing against evolution if you haven't already engaged with that primary literature? Like, I'm really intrigued when I heard you say that on some other show or something. It's like, well, you know, I hadn't really learned about evolution, but I used to go out and argue against it. Like, what arguments are you using? Like, how do you do
Great
that?
question. First of all, it was a different time.
Yeah.
Anyone who's interested in these issues now can get, I mean, you could just ask ChatGPT to give you a primer on evolution. But all I had was, I mean, there was a few books, but one I remember, there was this, I can't remember the author's name, but the title was Icons of Evolution. And it kind of talks about the quote unquote best arguments for evolution, and he talks about why they're all corrupt. And so what I found is that, first of all, 99% of the people that I engaged with about this, where I was from, and at the time, knew nothing about evolution. Even if they were like, yeah, I agree with that because that's what the scientists say.
Yeah.
But then you're like, describe the mechanism of evolution.
It's like we come from monkeys, right?
Well, I had read enough to say things like, okay, so you're saying that the primary raw material of evolution and through natural selection are genetic mutations. So give me an example of a beneficial mutation. And at best, your beneficial mutation just causes a change in color. But give me an example of a new species.
Yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't happen.
That stare is quite,
right.
It's quite intimidating. Suddenly, I'm like, I'm thinking, is evolution true? I don't know.
Right.
Man, I don't know, man.
And so I just had those back pocket, and then I would say things like, take for instance, if we took all, you have this concept that you put organisms into different environments and they suddenly become, they adapt to different environments. But what if we were to take all of the dogs in the world and put them out into the wild? What would happen? We would have a convergence to a type of canine that could survive in the wild. And it wouldn't be my little poodle, and it wouldn't be the Great Dane. It wouldn't be these extravagant dogs that we have created through artificial selection. It would be the one that adapts to the environment, and that would probably look like a wolf. End of story. Evolution doesn't happen. And most people who don't know anything about it are like, oh, okay, I guess it doesn't happen.
Yeah, it's easy enough to do when somebody really, really just doesn't know. Because I think most people are at that position where they kind of know that evolution is this thing and it's got something to do with genetics and environment selection, but all you need is like one good counterexample or question that can't be answered, along with that confidence. Yeah. And those eyebrows.
Yeah, the eyebrows are key.
The eyebrows and the confidence, and there's something about the fact that you're doing this kind of professionally as well. Like if they know, oh, this is a guy who's part of this organization and whatnot, they're probably thinking, even if I had an answer, he'll have heard it because he does this every day.
Right,
and so like there's just something about that confidence which is going to be quite off-putting for
I don't get that at all.
people. But presumably those questions start to get answered for you.
Confidence doesn't mean shit to me.
By the reading that you're
Confidently wrong.
doing. And was it, I mean, you said it was Francis Collins' book. Is there a moment where you're reading it and like your mind goes to those apologetical arguments that you make and you're like, oh, that doesn't work anymore.
I'm like, this, there's not an explanation for this. And of course, you can do that. You can, every single one of these things, there's a page on the Answers in Genesis website for everything that we could talk about related to evolution. So they've got their perspective on the second chromosome and the fusing of that chromosome. They've got their perspective on these retroviruses. And I think I was getting to a place where I no longer, I would essentially, I read their responses and I was just like, this can't be right. Like that they have to be wrong about this. Like this is not a good faith argument. This is not a good faith answer, you know? And that's when it started dawning on me that, okay, I began to notice a pattern. And I think maybe I didn't even realize I was noticing a pattern yet, but this is the pattern that started then and then propagated itself throughout my entire deconstruction. And that is, there's a...
By the way, I did watch Gavin Ortland's take on this. We might do that video next. Not right now, but like later on in the week. I'm not sure we're going to watch Ruslan's reaction because it was inane and brain dead. Gavin Ortland's reaction was great. Like Gavin Ortland had a take on it, but Ruslan, no, that was. I guess I can't say what that was because I'm partnered.
Type of answer that someone gives when their allegiance is to the truth that
I mean, I'm not making money anyway, so who cares if I get demonetized, right?
they need to be true. And there's a type of answer that people who are actually interested in the truth give. And what I kept finding is that
Arrogance. He still hasn't stopped being arrogant.
Christian apologetics, really consists of people who are like, well, the truth cannot be questioned. The truth, we've predetermined that this is true. And now we've got to find a way to buttress that truth.
Well, that's the problem with presuppositionalism.
Truth. And there's a tenor to those arguments that they don't hold up very well under scrutiny. When you get the answer to the answer to the answer to the answer, you just keep finding it just seems like these people seem to be interested in what actually happened, and these people seem to be interested in the truth that they hope that happened. Mm-hmm. And that was a huge flip for me because again, as a Christian, what I thought is we have the truth. They have the desperate attempt to be anti-God, right? We were taught that these evolutionists, these professors who are teaching this kind of stuff, like they're sinful, they're deceived. They desperately don't want God to exist. So therefore they got to come up with these ideas in order to explain them away. But when you're like, actually, first of all, most of these ideas came from Christians. The age of the earth, these geologists back in the day, these are just most people were Christians. It's just the fact of the matter. And they were like, oh, God must have done it in this way. Yeah. And then when they find evolution, okay, God must have done it in this way. And so the scientific stuff, there were plenty of people who taught me like, it's okay, you can believe that. You can be a theistic evolutionist. You probably still need to believe in a literal Adam and Eve because the atonement still needs to make sense. Original sin's got to make sense. And I was like, okay, yeah, those arguments seem like we're just trying to marry two disparate ideas. Yeah. But I was like, okay. But I just think
again, confusing literature for history,
that mentality,
and theology for philosophy, and philosophy for science. Just a lot of categorical errors here. And Rhett's, is that his name? Understanding of anything.
Of finding that people, because it got into biblical scholarship after that. It got into, well, the primeval history. So this is allegory. Like this didn't happen. These are religious myths that were adapted from other myths that were around at the same time.
Again, none of this is problematic if you simply acknowledge all this from the beginning.
Mm-hmm. The flood didn't happen. Yeah. The Tower of Babel is a weird explanation for language. I started seeing all that, and so I was like, okay, now my entire view of the beginning of the Bible is different. And again, I would go to the apologetics answer, and I would be like, one person seems to...
Don't go to that's your main problem here. Problem number one, you're coming from a literalistic interpretation based off Protestant presumptions. But problem number two is you're going to apologetics for answers. That's the wrong thing to do.
To be like the critical scholars actually seem to be like interested in what happened. Like, why did these people write this? Why is it like this? where did this idea come from? And then the Christian apologists seem to be like, well, we know it's God's word, so how do we prove it?
Mm-hmm.
And it just kept creeping closer and closer to Jesus. And I had this this happened, this was years, right? Because I was like, well, I'm not going to stop believing in Jesus. You know, you can have these weird ideas about the Old Testament, but like Jesus is different. I mean, I have a personal relationship with him, and you know, and that stuff's true, right? You know, the stuff about the resurrection, my arguments for why the resurrection had happened, and it being the best explanation for the beginning of the church and all this. I'd like had those arguments in my back pocket. But long story short, eventually those arguments fell victim to the same type of critique. They're a little bit different because I do think that there's a more interesting conversation around the resurrection because you can kind of know a little bit less about what happened. And you can be somebody who believes all this stuff about that I might agree with related to evolution, but then be like, I have a faith position that Jesus actually rose from the dead. I recognize that I can't, it's not a scientific thing, I can't prove it. It is a little bit different category. But it opened me up to questioning these sacred ideas. And it's just the most sacred idea of all that Jesus was the Son of God who raised from the dead, eventually was the last domino to fall.
Wow. And how does that finally fall? I mean, because the evolution thing confronts, and I think the reason why it was so scandalous in the 19th century is kind of just a vibe shift, right? Because when you speak to philosophically minded Christians, they will quite correctly say, there is no argumentative syllogism you can construct which shows that because animals have a common ancestor, therefore God doesn't exist. That doesn't follow. There's no argument you can make from
100%.
that. But it's hard to put into words just like the feeling. Again, it's like we were saying before about the indicating a direction of thought. When a society is based upon the idea that human beings are special and unique.
Yeah.
This idea, if you're smart, beings are special and unique.
Yeah.
When a society is based upon the idea that human beings are special and unique.
Yeah.
What makes you think we're special and unique? Where are you getting that from? Seriously. Because we're charged with taking care of the earth? Because we have a soul? Animals can have souls. So, my first observation here is that Rhett is not very intellectually intelligent. I mean, straight up. The second observation here. Alex is punching down when helping or agreeing with Rhett. Alex clearly knows what he's talking about. Rhett does not.
This idea, if you're smart, it doesn't need to undermine the idea that God exists, but it shows this direction of thought. Like, oh gosh, we're not as special as we thought we were, and where's that going to lead?
But we're not special. That's kind of the point. I don't understand this need for assurance or this need for funny. I don't understand this need to be special, to be unique. You're already unique. What is this?
I'm pretty sure that in the first edition of The Origin of Species in 1859, that beautiful ending, there is grandeur in this view of life from many different species, whatever it is, having been breathed into many lives or into one, have been and are being evolved. And there's that phrase, like having been breathed into one or to many, primordial forms of life. And presumably because of the backlash that this idea receives in the second edition of The Origin of Species, having been breathed by the creator into one life or to many, Darwin defaced the ending, his moving ending to The Origin of Species. And I think by edition 3, it was back out again. So you can, I've seen one in person, an actual second
really?
edition at like a rare bookshop. If you happen to be in like a fancy rare bookshop and see if they've got a second edition, it will say by the creator.
Wow.
Because there's just something so confronting about it that you need to respond to. But okay, there's that. And then there's the resurrection. That's not just like a vibe shift. This is the historical claim upon which Christianity is based. And like you say, it's less accessible to the scientific method because it's a singular event.
Yeah.
It's not like a process that's still going on today that we can biologically observe. And you can't scientifically or historically prove the resurrection, but you can prove like surrounding facts.
Yep.
You can say that Jesus was crucified, that his disciples claimed to see him, all of this kind of stuff. All of those arguments are still there and still sat in your mind. Presumably you're pretty familiar with them as someone who specializes in outreach. Why would that change? Like what shifts the dial on those kinds of arguments for you?
And this is where I don't remember specifically like, okay, well, it was this book, but it could be something as simple. It was one aspect of that argument, of that case. Probably the most famous one is, well, why would the disciples die for a lie?
Mm-hmm.
And then when I really looked into that, and then I found that, well, I don't think I can actually historically defend that anyone died for something that they knew to be a lie. Like, I think that this can be explained by them being deceived, right? They could just be wrong about what they saw or their perspective. But I think the bigger picture was, as I started looking at different perspectives on the historical Jesus, I remember there was one book that was called The Historical Jesus, 5 Views. And I read that book, and I think every one of them was some kind of Christian.
Yeah,
just
sure.
Different gradations of liberal or progressive Christian. And everyone laid out their case with a lot of confidence and a lot more scholarship and knowledge than I have about the subject. But it was so gray. And I just started, this feeling began to creep in, which was like, okay, well, maybe he did rise from the dead, but what I've learned about the process of historical investigation, and also just the nature of human psychology and the nature of religious movements and the nature of people's willingness to believe things, like, it began to dawn on me that I don't know exactly what happened with Jesus. I don't know specifically the nature of his death. Like, was he left on the cross? Was he thrown into a large, like mass grave? Was he put into a rich man's grave by Joseph of Arimathea? Was that invented? I don't know. But what seems to be pretty clear to me is that it's almost certain that there's some explanation for how it all started that isn't that he actually raised from the dead. In my compulsion to believe that he raised from the dead, it is a religious position. It is a faith position. It's not an historically defensible position to the degree that these Christian apologists make it out to be. We were talking last night about Dale Allison, how I just think I love his book, Apology Position, for how it's almost certain that there's some explanation for how it all started that isn't that he actually raised from the dead. In my compulsion to believe that he raised from the dead, it is a religious position. It is a faith position. It's not.
No. This is not a good argumentation. I hate rewinding this so much, but this is just bad.
It's almost certain that there's some explanation for how it all started. His grave by Joseph of Arimathea. Was that invented? I don't know. But what seems to be pretty clear to me is that it's almost a rich man, the nature of specifically the nature of his death. Like, was he left on the cross? Was he thrown into?
All right, let's go back. Let's hear exactly what he's trying to say here. I'm going to slow it down. I'm going to be speaking at every point, so I don't think Alex will hit me with a copyright claim. Let's go. Let's look at this. What's going on here again? Let's take it back to that point right there.
I read that book, and I think every one of them was some kind of Christian.
Yeah,
just
sure.
Different gradations of liberal or progressive Christian. And everyone laid out their case with a lot of confidence and a lot more scholarship and knowledge than I have about the subject.
Well, that's clear. I think what's one of those? There's a Zondervan book, I think, on the case of the resurrection, where it's 4 different perspectives.
but it was so gray. And I just started, this feeling began to creep in, which was like, okay, well, maybe he did rise from the dead, but what I've learned about the process of historical investigation, and also just the nature of human psychology and the nature of religious movements and the nature of people's willingness to believe things, like, it began to dawn on me that I don't know exactly what happened with Jesus. I don't know the nature of specifically the nature of his death. Like, was he left on the cross? Was he thrown into a large, like mass grave? Was he?
He wasn't thrown into a mass grave. So part of the problem is that all of these are not only heresies, but they're also debunked myths. So you have the Islamic problem with the resurrection. I'm not talking about the apologetical or polemical trick to make Islam false. But the Islamic claim is different than the Christian claim. And then you have some of the Jewish claims about what happened to Jesus, if you believe the Talmud is actually talking about Jesus, which that's another question altogether. And then you have the arguments the Bible presents for different claims and the counters to that. This is not hard. It's really simple. Either you believe Jesus resurrected or you didn't. If he didn't resurrect it, you don't believe, you're not a Christian. It's just that easy. I don't understand why this guy is sweating this.
Was he put into a rich man's grave by Joseph of Arimathea? Was that invented?
I think he doesn't understand literature. I'm not being funny here. I'm not trying to be sarcastic. I really feel this dude doesn't understand literature. He's so convinced of the literalness of the Bible that if anything is constructed literarily post hoc, then he's falsifying everything. This is not how reading works. It's not how history works. The study of history is you're creating a narrative out of the known facts. And these are prehistorical writings, I would say. Not as in prehistoric as in like prehistory, but as in like the subject of history. I don't think the writers of the Bible, of the Gospels, were writing history. They were writing lives. They're not writing history as we understand history today. They're not doing what Thucydides was doing. They're doing what Livy was doing. They're doing what Suetonius was doing. They're doing what Plutarch was doing. But they're not doing what Thucydides was doing.
I don't know. But what seems to be pretty clear to me is that it's almost...
Again, the Gospels are lives, just straight up. They're just lives. Go read Plutarch. Go read Suetonius. They're lives. The epistles are just epistles. They're letters. Take out the synonymous ones. Take out the, take out all that and just leave the affirmed letters, if you will. That's all that they are letters. You could argue that Revelation, the Apocalypse, is pure literature. I mean, that's fine. I'm not sure what's destroying this guy's brain here.
certain that there's some explanation for how it all started. that isn't that he actually raised from the dead. In my compulsion to believe that he raised from the dead, it is a religious position.
Thomas.
It is a
Thomas, you're going to have to write a 500-word apology for not watching the show last night. I watched all of that, everything that's in red last night, and you weren't here. I'm disappointed. I'm hurt. I had to go to therapy.
faith position. It's not an historically defensible position to the degree that
What in the world is he talking about? It's literally a faith claim. The concept of resurrection. In the narrative itself, you have Doubting Thomas. This is literally a faith claim. What is he doing? Why is he twisting himself into knots here? This is not a hard thing to get.
these Christian apologists make it out to be. We were talking last night about Dale Allison, how I just think I love his book.
He's great.
And this was all like, I read that like 2 years ago. So this is all way after my deconstruction, but I'm still interested in the subject. But, he's a Christian. He believes that it happened.
This guy's a moron.
But I think he's got one of the best books on the resurrection. The thing is so refreshing about it is he's not coming at this from like a Gary Habermas standpoint where he's like, this is the most reasonable thing. And if you don't agree with that, you're being unreasonable. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, no, we're talking about the pinnacle of an unreasonable idea, an unreasonable event. This is not, if this happened, this is something I have to accept on faith. And I am completely fine with people who do that. But it
is 100% a thing that has to be accepted on faith. There's, what are you trying to do? Trying to prove the color of an atom? Like, what is this? This is insane.
Intuition is that it didn't happen, and I have sort of lost my ability to have faith in things that are just conjecture and things that something.
But it's not conjecture. It's a literal leap of faith. It's a literal leap of faith. You can't get there through reason. This is an act of faith. Again, I really do feel that it's the fact that he comes from a Protestant background that makes it impossible for him to make this leap. Because to make the leap is an action, and to take an action is a work. Here, a good work. And therefore, if you're doing anything on your own to reach God, then you don't have true faith, then you never believed in the first place. It's the Protestant presumption, the presupposition that's actually destroying his ability to have faith. He didn't get here intellectually. Alex began as a jerk if you go back and watch his old stuff, but his atheism is intellectual. Rhett's is not. This is he's like a guy with a broken heart. He's never going to trust a woman again. You know what I mean? Only here, he's never going to trust a religious person again.
That foundational.
He was lied to.
I mean, I still have what I would call some level of religious faith. We can talk about what that might look like. But I think that my ability to
let's go back to
have faith in the idea of the resurrection, it just was like, why would you choose for that to be the thing that you believed in when all these other things have sort of fallen apart to this process?
But none of those things that you believe in are part of Christianity. They're part of Protestantism, but they're not part of traditional Christianity. I think your problem is that you're tying into Protestantism and American evangelicalism into your belief system, and you're adding weights and pressures that don't exist for the traditional Christian. The burden is light. That's the whole point. The burden is light. It's one leap of faith. One. You make that leap, you're in. It's not a million leaps of faith.
Came across an interesting idea a friend told me. I wish I could remember exactly how this goes, but I'm pretty sure that there is a development as the Gospels go on about the description of the tomb. So like in Mark's gospel, presumably, I think it just says that Jesus is put in a tomb. And in Matthew's gospel, it becomes a new tomb. And then I think by Luke, it's a new tomb in which no one had been laid. Or maybe that's John. I can't remember the details, but there's things that you wouldn't notice that I'd never come across this idea before. If the empty tomb is an important apologetic to Jesus' resurrection, well, we know that the tomb was empty. In order to know that the tomb was empty, you need to ensure that Jesus was probably the only person laid in it, because otherwise it could have been mixed up with someone else or something like this. And so there is this hint at evidence of an early apologetical motive to make the tomb a new tomb, which means there's no other bodies in there, and then specifically a new tomb in which no one had been laid.
Right.
So that when they say there's an empty tomb, nobody can come along and say, well, are you sure it wasn't somebody else, or someone stole the body, or it got lost or
One
something?
of the things that bothers me about Alex is that he states these things as if they somehow disprove the apologetic, but the apologetic is part of the narrative. Like, that is what the writers were doing. I don't this happens when I talk to BS and when I talk to Tux. I don't understand what you think the writers were trying to do. Like, are you honestly telling me that you think that the writers were trying to write history? Because if you think that, you're just wrong. That's not what they were doing. They weren't writing history. History for them as a subject didn't exist. They're writing theology. They're writing gospel. They're writing faith. They're not writing history. Can we use their writing to discover history? Sure. It's a guidepost to what really happened. You have 4 different accountings from 4 different time periods, from 4 different perspectives, 4 different communities. You can get an idea, you can get a gist. You can use all the Gospels, and you can use the epistles to figure out. And then if you use some archaeology and some general context from other histories of that time period, you can get a really good, strong understanding. Read some Josephus, read some Tacitus. I'm guessing Philo. I haven't read Philo, so I don't know. But let's say Philo. You read some Caesar, Suetonius. I'm trying to figure out. Let's pretend the Bible doesn't exist for a second. And we're having this conversation about the life of Caesar. And we're looking at Suetonius, and we're looking at other writers. And we're trying to reconstruct all this stuff. And maybe we even go as far as Shakespeare. We go as far as Shakespeare to have this corpus to understand who Julius Caesar was, or Alexander the Great was. You wouldn't be tied into these inconsistencies this way. You would understand what the writer's doing. I don't understand why BS, Tux, Rhett, Alex, who these are people who don't believe in God, don't understand what the writers are doing. If a Christian who believes in God can understand what the writer is doing, then why can't the atheist? If you're reading critical scholarship, and critical scholarship is saying this isn't history, why are you trying to pull history from it? I don't understand what's happening there.
You're right that when you those little questions, are we sure that he was taken down from the cross and laid in the tomb in the way that it's described? And if you start to notice apologetical motivations potentially in those very stories, it starts to undermine the historicity.
It's not potential. It is apologetical. It's written for a different audience. It's structured in a certain way to get people to believe a certain thing. It is literature. It is gospel. It is lives. I don't.
See a little bit. Like how Matthew's gospel is the only one that mentions the guards at the tomb.
Right.
And we're told why the guards, like we're told by Matthew essentially why he's included the story of the guards, because they are like, Jesus is gone. And the Jews pay the guards, and say, you're going to spread the rumor that the body got stolen. That's what you're going to do. And the guards are like, sure thing, we'll do that. We'll take that money. And this is a rumor that still persists to this day, says Matthew's gospel.
And what's the best explanation for that?
Is it like there were actually guards and Matthew was the only person who happened to report them? Or has Matthew invented the guards as an apologetical tool, admitting that there is this rumor that the body was stolen, and thereby having to invent the guards at the tomb to protect against that? Maybe there were guards. Like, we can't prove that there weren't. But when you start to see how much potential apologetical motivation is underlying these claims in these gospels, which, although broadly seeming to be attempts at historical by...
It's so cynical and skeptical. It's so weird. It's so weird to be so stuck in literalism. Whether you're a Protestant or an anti-theist, you're stuck in literalism, and I don't understand why.
Biography are also just full of what is probably best thought of as mythical storytelling. Becomes really difficult. Dale Allison talks at length about the raising of the graves in Matthew's gospel at the time of Jesus'
which
death.
is bonkers.
Absolutely bonkers. But it's really strange how it's worded as well, because it says that when Jesus dies, it says at that moment when he dies, there's a great earthquake and all the graves open, and the holy ones of Jerusalem appear to people after the resurrection. And it's really
Because poetry and metaphor are lost on you?
weird, clunky wording, because it says that the graves opened when Jesus died, but then it said that the people appeared to many after the resurrection, as if like they were just laying dead in the open tomb for 3 days or something. Like, it's weirdly worded, and you've got this, and Matthew's the only one who reports it, and you've got this undertone of Jesus being the firstborn of the dead, and it's like, okay, like Dale Allison is pretty convinced this didn't actually happen. It's another question whether Matthew thought it happened,
Right.
But the problem is that if Matthew didn't, this is just...
And again, it's really hard to anachronistically fold things in, because you're talking about modern writing, and it's impossible to get modern writing that hasn't been influenced by biblical writing. But there's this really great episode of Babylon 5. It's after the show was no longer doing as good as it once was. And all the characters meet their dead relatives. And there's a question at the end if they were really seeing these dead relatives or if it was just an hallucination caused by the mind. But the reaction, the effect is what mattered. The change that it caused in the characters going on into the rest of the story, into the rest of the season, was palpable and was super important to not only discovering who these characters were before the story started, but to understand the trajectory of the characters. That way, even after the story ends, you kind of get an idea of where the character's going and the importance of the characters. That's why when Ivanova just stops showing up in the show, it's really problematic. But you have, you make a character like the captain suddenly super important because of this narrative thing that's going on. That's what the Bible's doing. I don't see the problem there. If I'm telling the story of my life, or if 4 of my friends after I die are telling the story of my life, and they get the gist correct and they get some of my sayings correct, but there are some differences in the storytelling. No one's going to think they're lying. I don't understand this. How do I put it? This need for absolute accuracy in a biography. That's written after the fact.
Well, a bit of myth that Matthew is obviously telling some kind of allegorical story. What does that mean? It means that Matthew is willing to make up stories about resurrecting people from the dead in order to serve a
If
theological
it happened
point.
once,
And then the floodgates are open, especially because Matthew's gospel is the earliest gospel that has any post-resurrection appearances
Right.
recorded in it. Boom, the doors are open.
yeah. Well, the thing that's so fascinating to me about this is
How are you so stupid that the first time you read it, you didn't have these questions? The first time I read the Bible, before I understood what the Bible was doing, I couldn't get through it because it was too unbelievable. Too many coincidences, too many. I mean, you're grown men arguing and talking with the mind of a child. As grown men, you should understand how journalism works. You should understand how history works. When you read a history book, you're reading a narrative perspective. When you're reading a story in the AP, in Newsweek, in the New Yorker, in the New York Times, and the Jerusalem Times, and I don't know if Palestine does, but let's say the Palestinian Times. You're reading a perspective and a narrative that creates a story that makes you feel a certain way and pulls on certain heartstrings and certain, intuitions. And it's trying to get you to feel a certain way about the story. The facts that the story is reporting don't always match up. When they, a few years ago, when they talked about flooding down here, by the way, I've now experienced flooding down here in Texas recently, like just 2 weeks ago. It didn't make the news. But when it did make the news, there was no actual flooding. But they made it sound like the whole area where I lived at was underwater, when in actuality, where it was underwater was about 400 miles north of here in in Houston. 400 miles north. Not down here in the Rio Grande Valley. When they were talking about the illegal immigrants and you actually went down and you drove to see what was going on, there was nothing. And AOC had to fake a photo where she was pretending to cry about something that wasn't even physically there. Like, it was completely fabricated. Because we could actually drive and go look. It's part of the reason why Democrats lost so much support down here in the Rio Grande Valley. The Rio Grande Valley used to be a completely blue area, and it flipped red because of all the BS people were saying to try to manipulate us. Well, we live here and we can drive and look at the stories that you're telling about us and see that the story isn't true. How childish are you that you... How immature is your mentality that you think the writing should never be questioned? You should question it from the beginning. There should never have been a point where you were reading it and going like, yeah, that just makes sense. You have to make it make sense. Otherwise, you're thinking with the mind of a child. As Paul says, when I was a child, I thought like a child. Now that I am an adult, it's time for me to put away childish things. You're a grown man reading a story about people living for thousands of years. Start understanding the analogies and the allegories. Just start doing the mental work.
Famously, evangelical Christians, especially when I was coming up in campus ministry, like, we had our anti-Mormon arguments.
Oh yeah,
right. There was this one summer that some Mormon missionaries, like, I was out of the country doing some missionary work, and Link was still in Raleigh, and there were Mormon missionaries that came to talk to him. They ended up coming back like 4 or 5 times because Link, at that time, especially at the time, wasn't controversial. It wasn't confrontational. He was just like, yeah, you guys. So they went through the whole spiel or whatever. And then when I got back, I was like, you let them come like 5 times? You didn't ever challenge them? He was like, well, I was just kind of waiting. I ended up writing this like pamphlet. I would do this all the time. I would write like little papers or pamphlets or whatever. And there was one that was like, this is what you need to say the next time the Mormons come to your door, right? Because you can take apart their theology and their history in a much. It's so recent, right? So that was my perspective. And I find it so interesting that the average Christian apologist...
Arrogance, arrogance, arrogance.
The level of scrutiny they apply to criticizing Mormonism, if they would just for a moment turn that level...
Let me tweak that. If you from the beginning are super critical and super analytical of your own faith, then your faith will be 1,000,000 times stronger when you come out the other end. Just straight up. My faith grew the more and more I dissected it and deconstructed it and examined it. The more I read the church fathers, the more I looked into other religions, the stronger my faith grew. If you start off with this fairy tale nonsense, if you start off with the tooth fairy and Santa Claus being real, then yeah, everything's going to look like a lie to you. Everything. Because you've been lied to.
Of scrutiny on their own story.
Yes.
You'd be like, guys, come on, do you see what you're doing? Or like, and if you had been born in a Muslim country and you were of the Muslim faith and you didn't believe that Jesus actually raised from the dead, what would your Muslim apologetic about the resurrection be? Like, do you really?
Yeah, you should actually read that, Rhett, because it's interesting and leads to ethical problems that are substantial and horrific.
Think these arguments are strong, or is it just you need them to be true?
Yeah.
It's so foundational to who you are. You need this to be true. But the second aspect of it is, it's like we're sitting here having this conversation in the context of 2025, where we have access to all this scholarship, and all this scholarship and all these discussions about these issues are such a recent phenomenon.
I kind of feel like he would still say that Catholics aren't Christian, because what he's defining as Christian, I know that Ruslan calls it a straw man, but what he's defining as Christian is a very specific type of evangelical that the rest of traditional Christianity doesn't believe in. Almost everything for the last hour and 9 minutes are all things that traditional Christians don't believe in. The only thing that traditional Christians believe in that he's, swung against is the resurrection of Christ. And if he goes into mythicist mode and starts going, oh, maybe Christ didn't exist, I mean, he's just leaving relative objections behind. And he's just becoming a mythicist. So I just think this is someone who was ignorant and arrogant as a child, ignorant and arrogant as a college student, who's now ignorant and arrogant in his atheism. He was an ignorant and arrogant Christian. He's now an ignorant and arrogant atheist. The problem isn't his atheism. The problem is his arrogance. He still thinks that he has to be right, that he has to know. And if he doesn't know, if he can't answer it, then it can't be true. But that's not how anything works. Yeah, I don't have a grasp of the math behind quantum mechanics. That doesn't mean quantum mechanics aren't true. I understand theology. I understand philosophy. That doesn't mean that I'm correct. Like there's a level of humility lacking in his understanding and in his lack of understanding. It's very paradoxical. He might want to look into Taoism.
That, first of all, the tiny minority of people who live today, who call themselves Christians, care about this stuff and actually take time to think about it, right? You believe that Jesus rose from the dead if you're a Christian, probably because your parents told you. Like 90% because your parents told you.
No.
And then you got into a movement where it's continually confirmed by people who come in and they say some smart stuff about it, and this is why you can trust it. So even if it did happen, it doesn't feel like a really penetrating investigation into the historical circumstances is what's going on.
And again, that just shows how weak your faith was and how weak your understanding is. I'm 7 years deep into critical scholarship on the Bible. I'm not going to school for this. This is something I do in my spare time. Like I have scholarly books. I have commentaries. I have real expensive academic translations of ancient commentaries. Like I don't know, man. You're rich. Buy the books. Read them. I don't just do this for Christianity. I do this for Buddhism, Shintoism. I got this commentary. It's like a study Bible, but it's for the Rig Veda. What is it for? It's for the Bhagavad Gita. Like, I mean, I'm just telling you, this stuff exists for other stuff too.
Going to like, make it click and be like, oh, it did happen. I looked under the last rock of history and I found the resurrection. Like, it doesn't seem like God intended for that to be the way. If
That's
Honestly, Thomas, this guy's so brain dead that I don't think he would understand Taoism. Taoism takes a lot. It takes a lot to get into Taoism, because you're talking about marrying and holding in your mind paradoxes all the time. I don't think he could hack it.
that's right.
this is clearly some sort of, this is a revelation. This is like, this is a secret. This is like God's secret information that you can choose to believe. And then your life is transformed. Like, I'm okay with people who frame it in that way. I'm like, well, I still think that I think this is a psychological phenomenon. I don't believe it. I'm a skeptic in that regard, but I just find it so interesting the way that some of these apologists go so hard on trying to prove it. It's like, do you really think that that's gonna be the thing that changes somebody's mind?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like it's what Jesus was doing.
No,
Verily I say unto you, premise one.
Yeah, he wasn't doing apologetics.
It doesn't work like that. It's clearly like not what it's all about.
Right.
And
I think that's the most true and correct thing they've said in this entire video. Jesus wasn't doing apologetics. And there's a reason to get rid of apologetics right there. I like what apologetics is supposed to be, not the stupid definition Ruslan gave, but a simple and ready, plain defense. A simple and ready, plain defense. That's all that it's supposed to be of the faith. That's it. Not what apologetics has become. Not premises, not any of this weird presuppositional stuff.
apologetics can only take you so far. I mean, there is this idea online in particular that to be a Christian or to be religious is to essentially do natural theology, is what they call it, which is like arguing for the existence of God. Like, the whole religion discussion has become consumed with God's existence, biblical scholarship, and
I think this right here is exactly the right argument.
we forget that it's actually an assumption, and a controversial assumption, that is the approach to have to this conversation. For many people, like, natural theology is just a waste of time and an improper approach to the question of God's existence. And most people who have a religious experience will report that. Thomas Aquinas famously didn't finish the Summa Theologica, the greatest Christian metaphysician of all time. And he doesn't finish it because he's performing Mass, he's performing the Eucharist, and he has a religious experience.
Right.
And his like friend or colleague or whatever is like writing to him, begging him, you have to finish this, Thomas. Like, this is, you've got to finish. And he says, I can write no more. It's all straw compared to what I've seen. And you're right about the double standard as well. I just had a Mormon on my show, Jacob Hansen, who, one of the key things that he likes to emphasize, he doesn't usually speak to atheists. This is quite funny. I saw him recently, and he says he doesn't usually speak to atheists because there are so many like metaphysical assumptions you have to make. If you want to talk about Mormonism, you already sound absolutely mental. If you're talking to someone who doesn't even already believe in like angels and God and stuff, you're not going to move an inch. But he's like, I always talk to Christians because they do believe in angels and revelation and prophets and all this kind of stuff. And he can kind of like hold up a mirror to these Christians because they look at him and be like, oh yeah, so like, God spoke to some dude in upstate New York through some like golden plates that like no one's ever seen, and he's like, yeah, well, how many witnesses do you have to the resurrection that left any accounts?
Right.
Like, we've got more eyewitness testimony to the golden plates than you've got to the resurrection, And it's this like, obviously I can look at this and think both of them are, not quite hitting the mark.
Right.
But his big gripe is like, I don't mind people saying that we don't have enough evidence or you're not convinced or whatever, but as a Christian, you can't switch that off when it comes to analyzing your own faith. And it does sound absurd to be like, oh, there was a prophet in New York, was there? But we've only just got used to the idea that religion comes from, that comes from the Middle East. The whole reason why Jesus is born of Nazareth is like a lowly origin. They even say in the Gospels, is he the guy from Nazareth? What good comes from Nazareth? We're just used to it now. But at the time, that would have sounded about as crackpot as saying, this guy in upstate New York, yeah, he's found some golden plates and they're buried under the ground. And so I do find like, I've talked about Mormonism a lot recently because I do find it holds up this interesting mirror to Christian apologetics. It's like, this is kind of how you...
So I don't really care about the apologetics part here, but I am reading the Book of Mormon, and it does not hold up to the Bible in any kind of way. I'm just going to put some cards on the table here. I think the Bible is the best understanding of the human condition I've ever read. It captures the human condition perfectly, and in so many different facets. And when I say the Bible, I mean the whole Bible, univocally again. But when after the Bible, I think the next best read probably the Bhagavad Gita. After the Bhagavad Gita, I have to go with the Tao Te Ching, The Art of War, Mirumoto Musashi, the Book of Five Rings. After the Book of Five Rings, I would go to the Odyssey, not the Iliad. The Iliad's a very tough read. I would go from the Odyssey to probably Working Days and Theogony. I love Theogony. Working Days is good advice, but Theogony is just beautiful. Ovid's way down on the bottom, to be very blunt. But Theogony, Hesiod, really captures the humanity of the aspects, if you will, the flaws, the little intricacies, the little. Oh, he's just beautiful. The Buddhist scriptures are not high up there. The Book of Wisdom and Proverbs just wipe out everything that the Buddha says. Like the Buddha sayings don't come close to the sayings of Jesus, and they don't even come close to Proverbs and wisdom, just to be very blunt. The Elder Edda, not the Prose Edda, but the Elder Edda, I would say, is up there. Not as good, but it's up there. I think then Ovid, Metamorphosis, comes in. But already now we're getting into fiction, and we're getting into non-religious text that just happens to have the gods in there. There's, in a way, there's not as much religious scripture out there as people think there is. And yes, I would put the Quran far under the quality of Ovid. I would have to say Revelation, New Testament, Gospels. The Exodus, Genesis, Job, the Odyssey, Theogony, Working Days, the Elder Edda, then almost all the school of Eastern philosophy, including some of the students of Confucius. Then the fictionalized later Roman period mythologies that are no longer really religious. Then the rest of the Bible. Then on the very bottom, after the Egyptian Book of the Dead, after the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Quran. I think that's how I would rate the religious books that I've read. In the order of eminence, in the order of beauty of writing style, in the order of theological value and philosophical value. Way up on top is the Book of Revelation. It's just amazing. And on the very bottom, not the very last book, but like maybe like the second to last book, because there's some other junk stuff, like with the Witch's Magical Bible and the Wiccan's Handbook and other stuff by Gerald and Gardner and Crowley. That's just crap. That stuff's way under the Quran. But when it comes to classical scripture, I'd say the Quran's on the bottom, and then everything else is on top. And most of the Roman and Greek, the Roman stuff is below the Greek stuff. The Greek stuff's just amazing. You get to the Mesopotamian, you get to, the Atarhasis and all of that. It's right below, the Buddha stuff, and then you got the Buddha, and you get Taoism and Shinto, and you get some great Confucius writings, and then you get everything with Sun Tzu, Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu is beautiful. Taoism. Then you get into Christianity, and Christianity just Gospels, amazing. I don't think Rhett knows what he's talking about.
You sound, guys, a lot of the time.
Yeah, I certainly agree. And to have been on that side of it, and to, I mean, I don't still have that document that I wrote, the guide to talking to your
That
Mormon
is a shame.
friends.
I was going to ask.
I mean, it might be in some, box.
Book of Mormon, I don't think is as good as the Quran. I think the Quran's better than the Book of Mormon.
Somewhere. But I can tell you that it was incredibly dismissive. And I think that I was trying to be cute and funny at the same time. And so I'm sure I was like essentially saying, can you believe that people believe this? Like, if you only knew how crazy this set of beliefs was, you would basically deny it on that, the fact of how crazy it was. But it's like, it's not any crazier. It's just less familiar. It's just less familiar than these things that we believe so wholeheartedly. Yeah, but at the time, I mean, you can't see it. When you're in it, you can't see it.
Yeah, of course. You said at the time you said you started believing in natural selection and your wife's in tears. Does that put you off? Do you think, oh gosh, maybe I shouldn't dig any further? Is it already an unstoppable force? How does that go? Because presumably she's kind of okay with the evolution thing now. So
she's more than okay with it.
How does that begin to develop? Do you just kind of keep going and say sorry, darling, but this is what I think, and there's nothing I can do about it?
Yeah, it moved very slow because, again, I didn't have all these YouTubers talking about this stuff. I had to make the decision to be like, I'm going to buy this book.
By the way, that's a lie, because YouTube was more than a thing. Before he came out as a president, before he came out as an atheist, YouTube and YouTube atheism was more than a thing.
And take the time to read it. And I'm still living my life. I'm not
11 years ago. 11 years ago, this was already a thing. So yeah, no, he's a little full of shit here.
I'm not a voracious reader. I mean, I read quite a bit, but it's pretty slow. And Link and I are trying to build a career, and we're trying to make ends meet. And this is early days of YouTube.
I read about a book a month. That's what I do.
So I was a bit scared of where this might lead. And I think I just had this idea, because again, where we come from, everyone else in our families are not just Christians, but they're strong, committed Christians. This is the most important thing in their life. We grew up looking down on cultural Christians. We could spot them. Now, that person just goes to church because it's the thing to do. But we go to church because this is the most important thing that we could do.
Again,
is
arrogance.
Having communion with other believers. And, and so I think that it moved very slowly because of that. I was getting into the historical Jesus stuff in 2010. I looking back at some of my journal entries, and that was when it was beginning to kind of fall apart. Like the Jesus part was falling apart. But we moved to LA in 2011. So one of the things that happened, Link and I had a series where we were making these local commercials. Several of them had gone viral in like the late aughts. And we ended up getting a TV show on IFC. That's why we moved out here. So we moved out here with our wives and kids all together in 2011. And I kind of thought to myself, this is maybe an opportunity to start over a little bit. You know, we went to a church that we had some friends at that we knew from out here, and it was in Hollywood, and it was like the music was awesome, and everyone was so cool, and they wore like the cool hats. It was like hipster church, and it was so much different than what I came from. Mm-hmm. And the way they talked about these issues was.
By the way, if you watch the latest, it's not Overthink podcast. Which one? What is it? It's the one with my two creepy people that I like. Something with Simone. But if you go and you watch that, they have an episode where they talk about why people are leaving the faith. And most people leave their faith simply because they move. And whatever's the most popular thing there is what they adopt.
It was just more nuanced and gray. And I found myself thinking like, I think I could do this. Mm-hmm. I think I could do this because, you know, I guess ultimately, if you backed this person into a corner, the pastor would probably believe all the stuff that I believe, but he's holding it a little bit more loosely, and maybe I can kind of have this thing like, I love Jesus, and I remember writing in my journal.
He's literally arguing for the slippery slope. You're just proving every Protestant apologist and doom and brimstone, fire and brimstone teacher correct. YouTube is the best. Only the infernal algorithm is. Oh, the algorithm has murdered my channel. I agree with you, Thomas.
When Peter talks about, you know, when Jesus is asking.
I think the run that I did last year on this channel, pre-algorithmic YouTube, I think I would have been a rock star. I think that would have been awesome.
And if he's going to leave, and he's like, well, where else would I go?
Yeah,
I thought the same thing. I was like, what am I going to do? Become an atheist? Become non-religious? Become a different religion? It's just like, even if I'm not sure about this, I'm sure that Jesus is good for me. Yeah. I'm sure that these ideas are good for me, and this idea of believing in resurrection and like this, I can kind of just maintain this. That's where I was when I moved out here. That lasted such a short period of time because when I would stop and I would just think about it, I'd be like, yeah, but it's probably not true. And I started finding people who had been through similar things I could talk to about these things. Mm-hmm. And you start just finding there's people who have...
Yeah, it's the influence. It's just influence here. He's just a sheep. He's not a wolf. He's not a shepherd. He's a sheep. And he's just following with the flock that he's with. This is not an independent thinker.
And also I started finding people, I can't remember exactly, they weren't really talking about on YouTube, but there were people writing about it, blogs and that kind of thing. And you just start finding, oh, these people don't believe this anymore, but they're still good people who want the same thing out of life. Because we thought, my wife and I thought our marriage would end. We thought we wouldn't have any...
arrogance and pride. And arrogance and pride in a denomination, in a faith, and what's going on, man? It's not Christianity.
Anything useful to share with our children. You know, when you believe this idea that you've got the truth and that this is the most essential truth, and it isn't just about your salvation, it's about your life. Like your marriage is based on this commitment to Christ first.
You sound like a terrible person.
Your kids and every decision that you make about them is based on this biblical understanding and this framework. You're going to throw that out. What are you going to do? What's going to happen to your marriage? What's going to happen to your kids? But then you start finding all these people who don't know what they think about it anymore, and they like still have solid marriages, and their kids are still good kids who are just trying the best that they can. And so I think that about 1 or 2 years into being out here, when I was kind of like, okay, I just don't believe this at all. I'm not going to call myself a Christian, but maybe we'll keep going to church for a while I try to figure out what we're going to do about the kids.
Yeah. Did that have anything to do with like LA and the demons of the city? Or do you think it was just like already, if you'd have stayed in North Carolina, the same thing would have happened?
I think that LA gave me the permission to basically be like, because if I was back home, and my decision to not go to church back home would have involved several discussions with family.
Yeah.
Whereas my decision to not go to church in LA was just my decision
It's
to not go to
anonymous.
church.
Yeah.
So
Well, it was also the friends that are now influencing you not to be religious. But okay.
there's no doubt. So that's what I'll give the Christian critics, is that the role that LA played is it did give me the freedom.
Sure.
Because we're not in a culturally Christian environment out here in the same way. It's like people believe all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And so my decision to be like, okay, well, we're just not going to be a part of this anymore.
Yeah.
Was made easier.
Yeah. And by that time, is your wife still in tears about it? Like, how does that progression?
By that time, I think the thing with her, we are in basically exactly the same place now in terms of like what she would, she believes.
I want to be very blunt. I don't really care about this part, about his relationship to Christianity today. If you guys care about it, I'll watch it. If not, I'm going to skip ahead to the risk of publicly speaking on theology. Let me know right now if you guys want me to watch this portion here, or I can skip it. We just go straight to the end.
Essentially the same thing, and it took her own path to that and has her own perspective, and the things that are important or interesting to me are not necessarily important or issues
It's like a
to her.
reverse Lee Strobel, isn't it?
Yeah.
The case against Christ,
Right.
The movie.
Yeah, and so she's basically in the same place, doesn't consider herself a Christian. But I think for her, as a mom who is homeschooling, I think there was this, well, what do we do? What do we do about our kids? I feel like I need to continue to teach some of these ideas to them, and there needs to be some kind of framework. And this is something that a lot of people who are deconstructing deal with, because, religion works. I definitely believe that we created it. But we created it because we needed it to some degree for the ritual, the community, the sense of awe, these things that are essential to the human experience that I do think you can experience outside of a religious community. But for most of history, religious communities have done that best.
Appreciate it. And I appreciate you taking the time to spell out some of your beliefs. I mean, like I say, it's perhaps an uncomfortable thing 5 years ago, whenever it was that you decided you want to do this, because it's not the most user-friendly topic in the world for a lot of people. But at the same time, you want to be open with people, and it feels a bit weird to, if you're going to let people into any degree, this is such a big, important part of your life. You kind of have to let it be known. And hopefully, in those 5 years, you felt like that was worth doing.
Yeah, I think so. I think the real struggle at this point, I have no regrets about having told the story and being honest about it. I think that the struggle is
part of the problem here is the story's a nothing burger. He moved out of his community. His arrogance wasn't serving him well. He was talking to people who disagreed with him. He realized he could be wrong, so he abandoned all of his beliefs. And he's just keeping the stuff that he thinks is good for his kids. That's kind of a nothing burger. If we was talking about anything but other than religion, I don't think anybody would care. This is... He says he deconstructed, but I don't hear deconstruction here. I hear apostatizing. I hear having a crisis of faith and figuring out that what you believed was BS, and then you lost all your faith. The problem is that you lost faith in the things that were not true, but you threw away everything. You threw away the baby with the bathwater. And that doesn't mean that if you somehow become Catholic, that suddenly you're going to believe everything. Of course not. But there were other systems of faith that didn't have the blind spots that you had, that would have given you the tools to confront the things that you were scared of. And I think that's part of the bigger issue here. I think you were lied to and gaslit into believing a false version of Christianity so early, for so long, that when the first domino started to crumble, everything fell apart. Now, of course, there's always the possibility you never believed. Of course, there's always the possibility that you still believe now, but you are just giving yourself to act otherwise. And I know you've hinted at both of those things. I don't know. I think it's more complicated than that. I think I would call it spiritual abuse. I'd call it psychological abuse. You were gaslit and lied to. And it's hard to then look at anything that even resembles the lie, even if it's the truth, and to believe it, because it's shaped so close to the truth that you can't tell the difference. So you'd rather just not. which I guess I would put you in an agnostic camp, but you're saying atheist here. Labeling yourself a skeptic, I think, is a mistake. You don't sound skeptical at all. You just sound lost, and that happens. Do you believe in God? I don't know. You say you're an atheist, then you're an atheist. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that. I think the problem is that in your arrogance, you're now trying to lead people into atheism. And you're telling people with your platform that other people's beliefs are false. And that puts you in the camp as the same camp as the apologists that you're arguing against. I'm not impressed. I'm not impressed at all. I don't think this is the God killer or religion killer that Ruslan and a few other Protestants fear it is. I do think it paints Protestantism in a very bad light, and it paints evangelicalism in a very bad light. And I guess he's a Southern Baptist, so it paints Southern Baptist in a really bad light. But if you're from the outside looking in, you already know this. You already know that young Earth creationists who deny evolution and vaccines have a bad rap in the rest of the world. Do I wish he had stayed Christian? I wish he had been Christian in the first place. I don't think what he was is really a Christian. That's what I think. That's what I think. I think unless he was baptized in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit into water, he was never a Christian.
Because
he's confusing intellectual assent, which is not faith, with practice, which is faith.
Good. What's the net good of me talking about these things?
Yeah, right.
Because I think that
he has no trust.
And this is something I've been thinking about more recently, because there are some people I think that I don't want to disrupt. If their faith is working for them, I'm not interested in disrupting that just because I might believe that it's not true and that there's some sort of delusion. Because I think there's a certain personality that can kind of go through this process and actually come out on the other side and still feel like they're living a really meaningful life. And for me, I don't regret the deconstruction one bit, and I don't regret the being public about it one bit. But I do ask.
And again, I said this to him because again, I don't like his videos. When he did his initial video, I said, I guess it was a live stream, I don't think that's what deconstruction is. I don't think this is what deconstruction is. This is not deconstruction to me. This is just someone who lost their faith or found out that what they believed in wasn't true. It's a shame, but yeah, you were lied to, and you then learned that evolution is real. That's not a big deal. There's plenty of Christians that believe in evolution. In fact, there's plenty of Christians that help the study of evolution and the progress of our understanding of evolution. So I think your limited understanding of what Christianity is and your very strict definition of what Christianity is what hurt you. You were wrong.
So sometimes I'm like, and I think this is what keeps me from talking about it more. It's just, okay, well, if I'm just taking something apart, but I'm not giving any tools, what is my role in this? And also, it's just entering into the fray, which actually is a question I had for you, right? Because you are in the fray in talking about this stuff on a regular basis. Sure. And 95% of the time, what I do is the silliest, most unserious content on the internet, right?
Right.
And that you couldn't offend somebody with it if you tried.
Yeah.
But when I choose to, in the small minority of time that I choose to talk about this, I make enemies. People are like, "What are you doing? This is a bad example. You're bringing people away from the faith." And even though I'm like, well, actually, I think I'm just causing people to question things that should be questioned. It's still I don't like getting that kind of negative attention.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't want to debate. I don't want to get into it with somebody online, really. Yeah. Right? I'm like, I'd rather just make you laugh, be a distraction from all the stuff that's going on in the world. But you obviously
Yeah, I feed off it.
you step right into it.
Yeah, it's my breakfast.
So like, how do you how do you approach that, knowing that this is like, I know you were just talking about you being at this.
Thank you for the question, Patrick. My dad's doing okay. I went back to, just to be very blunt, I wasn't able to pay my house tax or my income tax because I didn't have enough money. I was a pawnbroker and a small loan officer, and my income working 60 hours a week with promotion and with the max raise they can give for the amount of time that I worked for them, according to their bylaws, was $100 less than than the taxes on my house for 1 month. So I went back to a corporate job. I've been back in a corporate job for only 2 months. I've only been there for 2 months. In 1 month, I made probably the same amount of money that I made a whole year as a small loans officer. I have enough money that I was able to hire 2 nurses, and have a day nurse for my dad and I have a night nurse. So I'm able to work as much as I need to work. Also, the work schedule at where I work now is fairly good. It's long hours, but they separate out the hours. So I have one shift where I'm here all morning, and I have one shift where I'm here in the evening. So that works out pretty well. I was able to, right now I'm broke, but for a good reason. I was able to fix my running toilet that you guys have been hearing for the last 3 months. I finally was able to fix it because I had the money for it. So my dad's doing much better. The day nurse, not as skilled as the night nurse, but the night nurse that we hired is amazing, and he's doing better. He doesn't like that I'm not at home as often, but he likes the fact that the nurses are joking with him and talk with him and are helping him live a life. So yeah, he's doing better. He's completely deaf now, and he's very lonely. But he's doing good. Yeah, yeah, he's doing good.
This conference where you're basically the only atheist at this conference.
Yeah, that's right. It's great fun, actually. And I've got quite a good working relationship with the people I debate with and the communities that I sort of step into as a bit of an outsider. And so
I'm not sure what's going to happen with the China thing. Me and my wife divorced, for those that don't know, but we reconciled. So it was complete separation. I then went to China, taught a little bit of English over there, came back, got this job, started doing really well. It's a corporate job, so I can't give out too many details, but let's just say I'm doing very, very well. And because of that, she's being apologetic for abandoning me and my dad, and she's trying to be less judgmental about the way that I spend my money or save my money. And yeah, she's okay that if I meet someone new that I move on. But I think there's only one person I've even talked to since coming back from China that I was even remotely interested in, and I never heard from that person again. So I don't know. It's possible me and my wife will fully reconcile and get remarried. I don't know. But even if that doesn't happen, my father's my priority right now, and my job is my second priority, and above all, God. So I'm going to church, although there are days I'm super exhausted and I do miss mass, and that's a shame. But I'm working a lot of hours, and I sometimes end up sleeping on my day off. I get 2 days off a week, which is pretty awesome. And like I said, I'm paying off almost all my debt. Something that I thought was going to be impossible to do. Almost all my debt is going to be paid off soon. I hired a CPA to help pay my taxes, and take care of my finances from the 1 year that I didn't have enough finances, and they've already fixed a lot of it. And I got a stack of paperwork to turn in right here to finish off the last of the things. So yeah, my financial issues are about to go away, and my any kind of pending legal stuff is done. I'll be able to pay my taxes in full and to pay any fees or penalties that I owe. So I'm very grateful for this job. I'm very grateful to God. And I do still plan to go back to school. My boss doesn't want me to because I'm doing so well. But I do plan to go back for my master's and then my bachelor's. My master's and then my doctorate. So that I went that backwards. I'm going to go get my bachelor's and then my associates. No, I plan to go back to school for my master's and then my doctorate. And it's probably going to be in biblical studies or religion, philosophy of religion. So that's what I plan on doing. Who knows if I'll even be accepted into a doctorate program? Let's be very honest. I'm very old and I'm very weird, but who knows? Maybe all of this that I've been doing for the last 11 years is going to help. Who knows? Kip, Dan, well, Dan I pay. Kip, hopefully you might want to put in a good word for me so I can maybe get into a good program. But yeah, I plan to go back to school, and once everything's finished, maybe I'll go to China. Maybe I'll go to Hong Kong. I don't know. I don't have to go to mainland China. I can always go to Hong Kong. Also, I've always had a thing for Norway, so maybe Norway would take me in. I don't know. But yeah, I still plan on moving on, especially after my dad passes. Right now, I'm just making sure that he's comfortable here at the house, and I can afford nursing care for him, so he doesn't have to go to a nursing home. If he ever needs 24-hour care, I can get him to a nursing home now, thanks to the money I'm earning. So, things are better.
It feels all right. Like I don't have any serious trouble.
The big question is, if me and my wife don't reconcile and the marriage is never recognized by the church, do I become a priest or a monk? That's the bigger question.
In that regard, but also it's always been the way it's been for me.
Yeah.
It's not like
I'm being very blunt. I don't see. I'm being very blunt. Patrick, Thomas, I'm talking directly to you too. I don't know if Kip's listening. I don't know if BS is listening, but let's just pretend it's us three. I'm 44 years old. I'm balding. I'm chubby. I'm diabetic. I don't, even with the massive success I'm having right now in my profession, in my career, I don't know that anyone's going to be interested in me at this point on. I skateboard and I weightlift and I have a katana collection. I have comic books and figurines. I don't see anybody wanting to date me, to be very honest. I just don't. So I'll probably die alone. So, if I get my degree, write some books, publish my fiction books, and play video games, and keep exercising till I can't exercise anymore. That's my plan. Make sure that when my cats pass, I bury them in the backyard. That's all I want to do, is make sure my cats are good and make sure my dad's good, and Thomas, being single has advantages. Yes, sir. Sure does. All right, let's finish this video, shall we?
got this show and I'm about to potentially nuke it with all of this talk about
Right.
religion and stuff. It's that's what it's been from the start. In fact, when I sort of move in the opposite direction, when I've spoken to you today, you've been sort of telling your story. I've been asking questions. It's been interesting. I've done the same thing with Christians, where it's been a similar vibe of you're just telling me a story, and I'm not going to sit there and go, well, I think you're wrong about this, and
Yeah.
start debating. And people in the comments kind of get annoyed about that sometimes. Or maybe annoyed's the wrong word, but they sort of say like, oh, I wish you'd have pushed back more. And I'm like, this person's just like telling me their story, I'm not here to do that today. And so if anything, I kind of had the opposite problem, which is that I need to be like opinionated, fiery. If I'm on the fence too much, then people start to lose interest in what they've signed up for, which is somebody to look to for a viewpoint, for an opinion.
Yep.
It'd be interesting to hear what that guy's got to say. And it's all context dependent. And honestly, I say that, but then as I've been a bit more willing to have those exploratory conversations and non-committal discussions, the channel has grown exponentially. And so I think that is resonating with people more.
Oh,
but I still, it means that when I do decide to come out and do the debate and remind people that actually I am still somebody who enjoys debating and defending an opinion and all of this kind of stuff, it's not like jarring for anybody, And so, yeah, I mean, I get a lot of that kind of commentary, but it depends how you feel about it, right? Because if you, after this conversation goes live, if somebody says, that thing that he said about the empty tomb, that's just like wrong, man. Look at this verse or look at this thing. You're going to look at that and you might go like, that's kind of annoying. Oh man, like maybe I shouldn't have said that. Whereas I'm going to be like, if it's significant enough, so I'll just make a video about it. I'll just respond. I'll be like, okay, here's 5 arguments against the empty tomb, because that's like my thing. So there's a sense to which also when those comments or when that attitude is coming towards me, I think, well, if it really comes to it, I'll just respond. Whereas you're not going to want to sit there making a video.
Do I want to go back?
All right, we got a comment. Patrick said, if I were Catholic, I absolutely would be interested in monasticism. I wish we had an equivalent to the Carthusian order. To be very blunt, Echo, turn on library. To be very blunt, I was a religious before I met my wife. I really wouldn't mind being a religious again. After my dad's in a nursing home, I don't want to abandon him for the safety of monasticism. But I can totally see myself being a mystic. Just being really blunt, I studied martial arts and Taoism and a lot of Asian, Eastern, esoteric philosophy. I could see myself becoming a mystic, especially in an Eastern Catholic rite tradition. I could definitely see that, and I don't have a problem with that. Would it be nice to have kids? Yeah. Would it be nice to have a wife? Yes. But working out every day, weightlifting, eating healthy, and being able to spend my money on people who need it, it's not the worst thing in the world. All right. I think that's it. I will talk to you all later. This was good. I think Alex did a great job. I think Rhett doesn't know what he's talking about. I don't know. I'm not as offended by this as Ruslan was. And I do think Gavin Ortland's response was pretty measured and fair. So we probably, if we do another one of these this week, we'll watch Gavin Ortland's response next. If not, I'll see you all on my next topic video and then see you all sometime next week. But be aware, maybe later this week, I'll do another live stream. I really miss streaming and I really enjoy doing it. Real quick, Patrick, thank you for commenting, asking good questions. Thomas, I love you, buddy. I'm glad you came by. I noticed there were other people in, but I weren't able to see who you were. I'm just going to assume you are the regular people that come in to watch the show. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you. And let's not forget, God loves you. So love your enemy, love your neighbor, love yourself. Love God above all, and God forgives you. So forgive your enemy, forgive your family, forgive yourself. And if you need to make a change today to make your life better, do it. Don't wait. Make the change today. Change your ways and sin no more. Someone very important said that. Someone who really existed in history, P.S. Lewis. All right, that's it. Talk to y'all later. Have a good night.